hard to see out here, you know, driving. See, if a deer jumps out in the road, it's going to be pretty tricky to see him. Ah, there we are.
The Great Lakes swimmers with everything is moving so fast, and they're going to be playing the First Baptist Church on June 19th, so mark that in your calendar. Right now, mark this on your calendar for today. Tune in to Ontario Today with Bill Brown. Let's see what's coming up.
Sue Johnson is a psychology professor at the University of Ottawa and the author of Hold Me Tight, a book that explores her theory about emotionally focused therapy. We'll open the phone lines this afternoon to ask.
Somehow, I don't think I want to hear that. Now look at all these clouds we have. There were no clouds in the sky a minute ago. Huh. I was waiting for a beautiful sunrise with lots of clouds. Well, now they're there, but they're not here. It's hard to see. I'm just showing you what it's like when you're trying to avoid hitting deer in the early morning on these roads. As long as everybody stays on their side of the roads, you're okay. It's not as dark as it looks in this camera, though. I guess you have to look through my dirty window, unless I zoom out, zoom in, and you can see through the dirty window. We have lots of hydro lines here. Lace beside the road. Oh, here we go. Can't see again. All is well. All is well.
River Monday to search for those two students. Ottawa firefighters were able to avert another potential drowning on the river yesterday. A group of friends of the two young Chinese men were preparing to launch a dinghy near a dangerous set of rapids and conduct their own search. Firefighters and police raced to the scene to stop them. Officials on both sides of the Ottawa River are open to the idea of building a new transit system that would link Gatineau and Ottawa. The National Capital Commission is currently leading a study on how to improve interprovincial transit in the future. Both OC Transpo and the STO are currently moving forward with their own transit plans. Ottawa is working on its future light rail system. Gatineau is about to start building its own version of the Transitway. The solution to get the two systems to work better together might just be a third one operating in between. A fire at the north end of Preston Street closed the road and snarled afternoon traffic for several hours yesterday. The fire is believed to have started in a mattress in the bedroom of a second-floor townhouse. Police had to close Preston between Somerset Street West and Albert Street. There were no injuries, and Preston was reopened just after 6 o'clock. It's commonly believed that crime goes up in hard economic times, but Ottawa seems to be bucking that trend. Overall property crimes fell by 8% last year. Some criminologists believe falling property crime rates may be partly an illusion caused by fewer people reporting crimes of theft. Ross Hastings is a professor of criminology at the University of Ottawa. He says falling rates of property crime may be connected to rising deductibles charged by the insurance industry. Some of the news.
This is much easier to drive,
Thank you. You are listening to Ottawa Morning on CBC Radio 1.
If it's important to Canadians, it's on the Current.
6 o'clock.
Anna Maria Tremonti.
Isn't that pretty?
Could be a case of error in judgment or bad luck.
So different going into the sun or out of the sun.
He finds himself a wanted man in the U.S. He's facing extradition for allegedly importing and selling goods related to endangered species, to wit, a polar bear rug.
The Current, weekday mornings at 8:37, a half hour later in Newfoundland.
This is
You gotta hear the news, eh?
Hudson Tire Sirs. This is World Report. In the news today, a Canada-U.S. discussion on border controls. A Public Safety Minister Peter Van Loan says it's time to push back against what he calls excesses at the Canada-U.S. border. Van Loan begins a two-day, two-country meeting today in Detroit with U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano. As Alison Crawford reports, Van Loan says there needs to be a more practical approach to border security.
It's called the thickening of the border. Long waits, gamma ray scanners, and red tape have slowed commercial traffic. And starting next week, regular Canadians crossing the border by car will need a passport or enhanced driver's license. In a recent interview with CBC News, U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano made no apologies.
It's not going to be going back and forth as if there's no border anymore. I think that the United States Congress years ago said, you know what, we have borders both north and south, and we have to have some standards and implement those at the border.
Brian Massey is an NDP MP from Windsor, Ontario, across the river from today's meeting in Detroit. He says Public Safety Minister Peter Van Loan has to push back.
But the minister has to be very clear is that we're entirely different than the Mexican border, and if he doesn't throw that message down very sharply to her, then he'll have failed Canadians and Canadian businesses that are suffering.
Van Loan says he wants a more practical approach to border security.
There was an approach in recent years where border security began to be just a question of taking measures without a question of whether they really added to security and without a consideration of the negative impact they might have on trade and how people live their lives and so on.
As for concrete announcements, it is expected Napolitano and Van Loan will formalize a pilot project where U.S. Coast Guards and the RCMP work on each other's boats on shared waterways to fight crimes such as drug smuggling. Alison Crawford, CBC News, Ottawa.
Conrad Black says he is not taking for granted the U.S. Supreme Court will free him from prison while he appeals his conviction for fraud and obstruction of justice. In an email to CBC News, Black says that he remains hopeful that justice will prevail. Last week, in a surprise decision, the High Court agreed to review Black's conviction. The former Canadian newspaper tycoon has been in a Florida prison since March of last year. He was sentenced to 6.5 years for swindling shareholders of Hollinger International, the company he led as chairman. North Korea is believed to have test-fired more missiles today. A South Korean news agency says the North fired 2 short-range missiles from an East Coast launch pad. Today's test comes a day after Pyongyang detonated a nuclear bomb. That test drew harsh criticism from international powers, including the United Nations. Russia says North Korea won't be able to avoid a tough UN resolution because the Security Council's reputation is at stake. And to read in-depth